Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my first game episode. So far in this channel, I've put up two short videos. Both of those were me solving puzzles on Lichess. Well, today I'm going to play a game, and again, this is going to be a training game. Hopefully, I'm playing to the best of my ability and hopefully learning something from it so that it is ultimately one of many steps that takes me closer to the goal of attaining the title of international master in chess, which is my goal here. It's also my goal here to hopefully be of interest to any other chess enthusiasts or anyone else who's interested in chess, and just to document, hopefully, the progression that I make towards my goal. With that said, let's now play a game. I'm going to play a game in the 15 plus 10 minute time control. And, well, as you can see, my rating is 16.05 at the moment. And I'm going to be playing against Jose Wilson, whose rating is 16.11. And basically, my strategy is to play in a way that I can understand. So a simple manner, which to me generally means, taking control of the center with the pawns. However, in more recent times, I have also been experimenting with the Italian game a little bit more often. And so that's what I'm going to do here. And I'm going to castle. I'm going to castle quickly. Whether I'm going to do that immediately, I probably will. Yeah, I'll just castle. And I guess with the Italian, my theory knowledge of the Italian is not very strong at all. So I am playing this based on principles only, and it's entirely possible that someone of this rating would feel quite comfortable with a lot of the Italian. I myself am not. So without wasting any more time talking about it, let's now decode what next move I want to play. Certainly d3 comes to mind. He could chase my bishop, but I think if I drop my bishop and allow this kind of a capture opening my rook, I don't think that's at all really bad for me. So I'm not too afraid of that. The benefit of playing this move is I can get my bishop out to a better square, not this one, of course. I meant to draw the arrow all the way out to here. So that could be good. It's quite likely, well, not likely, but possible that he wants to play this kind of a pawn move before moving out his knight. I'm not sure I can really prevent that. Of course, I could take, he could take back, or I can just leave it. So I do kind of like the looks of this move. So you know what, without further ado, I think at this point, it's prudent to consider time management as well. And so I think just pushing the pawn to d3 is an acceptable move. Perhaps I'm going to want to move my knight at some stage and try and play f4 myself. So in the meantime, I could go for this kind of a trade. If he wants to do this trade, I'll then have a number of pawns controlling much of the center, which could be good. And this pawn will no longer be here, which means this file could be open, and I'll be applying a lot of pressure on the f7 square. So I don't mind that as an option. He could always drop his bishop back and just ignore that, which gives me the opportunity to continue my development in a number of different ways. One of which would be to take, actually, would be to take his bishop. And when he recaptures, even pushing this pawn a little bit further up the board. So yeah, that's possible. Is there anything else I would rather do? So let me have a look at this now. I could also play a move like this, just to take control of the b4 square and also give my bishop the a2 square. In case that he did want to play this, I could then play the bishop back to a2 and keep my bishop on this diagonal, which I don't mind the idea. I don't mind the idea at all. He might be wanting to pin this knight. If he does, I can then play this move and put the question. If he takes the knight, I don't think I need to be too afraid of that, although he will be able to gain a tempo on my queen, and likely my queen has to then come back. Now that could be a reason to play this move. This move might allow this move in the future. potentially. It doesn't really do anything against this threat. That threat could be met with h3. h3 could therefore be a move of interest. h3 as well could allow king h2 in future. So that is an interesting possibility. And in that case, he could always play a move like this to counteract my bishop in the center. Again, then I can play a move like this and get the trade on my terms if I want it. But alternatively, if I did play a move like a3 and he did pin my knight, it's not impossible for me to defend that knight with my knight. Then if he puts further pressure on me, it's not really so scary anymore. And if I end up then playing this move and chasing him back, I could end up weakening my kingside. So I'm actually going to play a3. I'm going to play h3, excuse me, just to take this option away from him. I don't think I'm in a rush at this point. I'm trying to play very solid chess. I do struggle with the time control, typical of anyone who's learned from John Bartholomew, which is where I really learned the basics of chess, of proper chess playing. But okay, let's move on. So he's developed his knight, electing not to push the pawn first, which is fine. So, okay, how to proceed? We still have a couple of different options. A3 was one, bishop E3 was one, possibly C3 was one as well. I think of those moves, I prefer A3. Although A3 and he counteracts my bishop, actually, no, I don't really like that as much. So I don't mind this. I think that's probably how I'm going to play this. Let's play this. Just put the question to his bishop of how he wants to play. Of course, if he takes, I'll take back. I don't have pre-moves enabled at this moment. Now, I think at the moment I'm playing solidly. I might have played inaccurately because of not knowing the theory of the Italian. I may have missed certain tricks and traps that may have been available to me. Here's a move that I didn't consider, not particularly afraid of it, but now that we're here, I can certainly consider it. Now, I guess one certain option would be to play C3, kind of force this knight into doing something. The most obvious move would be to take my knight, which I could take with the queen. And I don't mind that at all. It somewhat pins his knight. If he were to move his knight, for argument's sake, there would be a checkmate immediately there. Also, if he takes the knight, well, I just don't think I really need to worry too much about him taking my knight because, well, I take back, but also I've achieved this C3 move. And if you recall, I was considering playing C3 anyway for the fact that it could prepare D4 in the future. So I'm not actually against that move. I mean, if I were to take his knight, he could take and sort of have a strange pawn structure, forcing me to move my bishop. Or he could take with his bishop, but then I take his bishop and he has a strange pawn structure, but not necessarily a bad pawn structure. So with that in mind, C3 is definitely, coming to me as the most appropriate move. There is also the idea of moving the knight to D2, and then only playing D3 after that. Idea being, if he takes, I can take with my knight, and I've kept my position very solid and I've continued my development. Now, if I'm going to play C3, it is quite likely that in the future, I may have to put my knight on D2 anyway. So I'm actually going to play knight D2. I'm going to play knight D2. And I know that, one difference is if he takes my knight, I could still take with my queen. So that if he then follows up by taking my bishop, I have the option of taking with the pawn or with the queen. But I think even given that option, I would take with the pawn anyway. And for that reason, if he takes my knight, I probably will take with my knight. If he takes my bishop, I'm not afraid at all to recapture with the pawn. And like I said, thereby opening up the F file for my rook. So again, I think I'm playing in a fairly solid way. C3 is still coming, but my development is looking good. My king's castled. My rooks are almost connected. My queen just has to move, and maybe we'll have an invitation to do that shortly, to either, well, it's too early to tell exactly where that's going to go. He hasn't castled, and he's actually elected to play a6, perhaps indicating that he wants to try for b5. He could try for b5 after c3, so c3, b5. But if I take the knight, he won't actually have time to take my bishop, because then I would take his bishop. So c5, c3, he will probably have to take my knight. He could, of course, drop back somewhere, but if he drops back, then I can take the bishop. And I think that pawn structure is not favorable for him. So I'm definitely looking at c3. If he takes, I'm thinking of taking with my knight. Then if b5 is played, I don't think I need to be particularly afraid of dropping my bishop back to b3. I can always play a3 in the future if I need to make use of the a2 square. So again, being cautious of time, I'm going to play the move c3, somewhat as planned. It's also possible to take this with the pawn and try and open up the g file, but I don't particularly like the way that it somewhat weakens my king. It also weakens the h3 pawn to the point of it would be captured immediately. So he's moved his knight back, which is, well, I'm not going to say it's not surprising. It did surprise me a little bit, but it's not the end of the world as far as my thoughts are concerned. So I'm considering playing d4 now, which again was another idea associated with c3. If I play d4, I'm attacking his bishop. If he takes the pawn, I can recapture, and then I'm still attacking that bishop. If he takes, I can take, and if he takes, then I can take back, which means he somewhat has to move the bishop, and I would be left with these very nice central pawns, which I think is a good thing. This knight here on d2 will protect the e4 square. Although I am also aware that he could potentially take e4, and if I were to recapture, then he could try this move. He could try this move. Then I could take the bishop, and if he takes knight, I can retract my bishop. So I think that's fine. So certainly d4 comes to mind. Conceptually, it makes a lot of sense to try and open the center when my development is more advanced than his, which I believe that it is. So I'm definitely considering d4. If he takes, take back, and most likely the bishop is going to drop to one of these squares. I think that's what I'm going to play. Again, in the interest of time, I'm actually didn't calculate this to any great depth, more of a conceptual understanding of trying to open the center while his king remains in the center compared to my king, which is castle. So he takes, I'm going to take back. Hopefully I'm not missing anything in particular. He did, in fact, move the bishop back. Okay, this pawn is maybe requiring a little bit more defense from the attack of the knight, but my knight is doing a decent job of it at the moment. Again, as mentioned before, he could take, and if I take back, he has this fork against these two pieces. So it may also be prudent to either drop my bishop back or potentially even lend further support with my queen to that square. If he pushes, if he were then to take the pawn, I can recapture, and then any fork move would be invalidated by the fact that I can just take. The issue with putting my queen here, though, is that annoying move, b5. I could sacrifice for two bishops, but don't believe that that would be worthwhile. And if after b5, I guess I could put my bishop back here, That's not necessarily ideal either. So possibly this, which is prophylaxis against b5. It's also prophylaxis against this. So again, in the interest of time, I think that's the move that I'm going to play. I could consider capturing, but that helps him to develop. So I am strongly leaning towards this move at present. It would also be possible to consider this move to further open up the center, attacking his knight. Attacking his knight. That way, if he comes in here, I'm under no obligation to recapture. And I can take this pawn in an attempt to further open up the scenario. This is also a move, attacking the bishop and attacking the knight. This knight, I mean, if he takes my bishop, well, I could take his knight, which is very interesting. He can take back, I take, he takes, I take. And in that scenario, trying to determine what the outcome is. So he takes a bishop, I take a knight. That seems quite even. He takes a pawn, I take a bishop, he takes a bishop, and I take a bishop. So in that, I end up with all of these, whereas he only would end up with these, if I'm not mistaken. So where would he put the knight? The problem with this move, as far as I can tell, is that it ends up blocking my bishop. So again, in the interest of time, I'm going to play this move, bishop b3. So putting him back on the clock. As you can see, I'm a bit too slow. Okay. Now, what do I want to do next? It's at that sort of time in the game. Perhaps what I want to do is develop the queen to a semi-open file where it also defends the e4 pawn, thereby freeing up my knight, or at least providing some support to that knight. Again, I could consider now this move. Again, attacking the knight. If he captures, I can recapture with my knight, opening up the possibilities for f4. And if he moves his knight somewhere, then, well, there are further options for development of my pieces. So I'm going to do that again, more or less based from conceptual understandings rather than from tactical calculations, which I would like to do. But from the considerations of time, I don't really have the time to make those decisions immediately now. So I'm considering now recapturing with the knight rather than with the pawn. For if I take with the pawn, the center has opened up and I am attacking his knight there, which is nice. He can take my bishop. If he takes my bishop, I can take the knight. And then it's somewhat interesting, really. Things really are somewhat opening up in that scenario. If I take like this, then he probably would be able to take this pawn. So I'm going to actually take like this, again, in the interest of opening the center. If he takes this, I could certainly just take back, opening up this file. Okay. Now this is going quite interestingly. He's just moved this out of the way. So things remain somewhat shut in the center for the minute, but now this knight no longer has the burden of defending the pawn on e4. Furthermore, the knight could actually jump out to e4 if it wishes to and possibly plant itself nicely on d6, which I think would be good. Would it be possible to prevent him from castling in the meantime while I get there? That I don't believe is possible. But even still, if he castles and I jump up here, something tells me that that's probably going to be a decent idea in the future. Very low on time, unfortunately. He is also threatening to take, and after I take back, to take this pawn. So I do have to be aware that a move like this could somewhat put myself in danger. Takes. If he takes, there would in fact be check first. Guess he would take with his knight. Yeah, this is it's going to be a time situation. It's going to be a time situation, I'm afraid. So I'll take his bishop and see if that discombobulates his rook a little bit, puts it on a rank and a file where it's kind of not doing a whole heap, at least for the moment. But it also just gets rid of that potential threat that was sitting there. Now I think I could proceed with the plan of rerouting this knight. Rerouting this knight. Do I want to reroute this knight, perhaps? Is there anything else that I should be focusing on here instead? It's hard to say. All right, so in the interest of time, I will try and develop this knight to an outpost square with knowledge that this pawn could be undermined, but undermining this pawn once he's castled also means opening up this diagonal a little bit more and strengthening my bishop. Not in any kind of super important way in the immediate present, but nevertheless, this would be a long-term concession with his king over there. Now, I don't need to jump out here immediately by any stretch. Can he defend this square with his knights somehow? Not in any way that I can see. So that can wait. Maybe I should move this knight here now. Try and get something happening and to allow f4 could be a potential move. Could certainly be a potential move. And again, in the interest of time, I think I'm going to have to play that. Okay. So, okay, in the interest of time, here we go. If he takes, I'll take back with the queen, applying pressure to the rook. But also I'm looking to eventually get my knight to an outpost square in a way where he attacks my pawn. I can reinforce the pawn and then maybe put a rook underneath so that the position becomes a little bit more stable. Whereas if I jumped my knight there straight away, he could undermine the pawn control. And with a knight there, I would be unable to further the stabilization of that kind of a position. So a little bit of a waiting move. Doesn't really matter to me whether he takes or not. It's just now that I'm able to do this. So 1 minute and 9 seconds, low on time. I probably should, and in fact, from now on, I probably will play longer games, maybe 30-30 rather than 15-10. But nevertheless, I think this game is going fairly well for the moment, in the sense that I think I'm playing fairly solidly. So if he takes the knight, I'm going to take back with my queen. Develops his queen attacking my knight. That's a nice move, because if I move my knight away, then he will have a double attack on this knight, which gives me the idea of maybe taking this knight first. Again, I'm going to have to play fairly quickly now. If he takes this knight, I'm going to be able to take the rook. And if he captures back, well, then I've got my my ideal sort of a situation there in terms of getting my outpost square. The problem with his queen here, though, is that it will prevent me from reinforcing with actually, it won't prevent me playing f4 because the rook does support the pawn on that square. So I think that's what we're going to do here, is possibly just put our knight there on the outpost square. Is there anything else I really want to look at? Certainly that's not going to work at the moment. This is possible, just to attack that rook. Definitely possible. And it wouldn't be possible if I've played this first. So if I play this, that certainly gets interesting, but then he can play a move like this. I take the rook, though. I can take that rook. So yeah, this is interesting to me. It's interesting to me, but I sense danger, so I'm going to play this instead and just put my knight there. I think I can even take the bishop, take with the bishop, and then reinforce the pawns if I want. Get my rooks in the game, and with 26 seconds, just continue trying to play solidly. I really didn't consider this sacrifice, and possibly I should have done. So I think if he takes here, then I might take the knight just to take that extra piece off the board. This will still be attacking him. if he were to try and sacrifice it for the pawn, the bishop would be able to come back and take. This move is not possible because my king nothing will be defending the pawn. If my king was here, then this move would be possible to hit the queen, which I would like to do from the perspective of I would like to get my queen out to d4 at some stage in order to be able to attack the rook. I also just want to get my rooks developed to good squares. Now he is fairly obviously attacking this pawn. And so king h2, I believe, makes sense here. I believe that makes sense. Okay. This also could have made sense, but I don't really want to unnecessarily weaken my kingside pawns. And I've made a blunder, probably a time error. Okay, what do you do about it? Not a good situation all of a sudden. Okay, so I'm gonna take this. I'm not too pleased with what I've done there. I've given him a strong advantage here as a result of getting myself into time pressure. But away we go. How to continue here? I would say perhaps somewhat playing on instinct, of course, but I want to give some extra protection to this pawn, and I want to bring my pieces where they may be able to attack his queen. I also wanted to vacate this square for a rook so that he wouldn't be able to do any counterattacks for the fact that his bishop would hang. So let's do that for the moment. And it's really unfortunate there that I lost a pawn and a knight. Very somewhat upsetting, but let's try and hold on and see what else we can do for the rest of the match. This pawn's not looking too good. I don't like the fact that the queen's x-raying me. And I don't like the fact that he has such a strong bishop here either. I mean, theoretically, it might even be worth sacrificing the rook for that bishop. In reality, probably not, because I don't have enough material compensation. I could possibly come here and attack the pawn. He'll simply defend. Then at least I could trade in this kind of a manner. But I don't think that's really going to help. I'll defend the pawn and defend this pawn too. Put my pawns in a way to dissuade his bishop from ever taking over a square like this, although his bishop's very comfortable where it is. So now I'm not particularly pleased with the situation as it stands. Of course, I'm down a lot of material. I'm down a lot on the clock. I would expect him to probably take control of the one of the open files, or the only truly open file. He doesn't, so I might do that for myself. Again, just low on time. You can just very easily come up with a counterattack there. I suppose if he does something like this, I can give a check. And when he takes back, I could attack his rook and the pawn. Problem is he could then give this attack and defend. And were I to give a check, he can escape to a square where I can no longer give any further checks, and really this game is over. So the position is resignable. The position is resignable. Probably is the sensible thing to do, to resign, because I don't think there's much more to be gained from continuing on with this game. I'll use his time now just to have a think if there's anything I'm missing. Of course, if he does this, maybe I should just try to maintain my material on the board rather than giving anything further away. But it is very hard to imagine how he's going to go wrong and how I'm going to go right. So I think I've blown it. I think I blew it with king h2, allowing the check to capturing the pawn and then capturing the knight, which is a shame because it was a beautiful pawn. It could have been further supported. but I don't really see any benefit in doing this. I don't really see any benefits at all to playing on. So I could consider taking this and then putting my rook up here, but he's going to defend everything. So I'm going to resign. We'll just let him make one more move. And I'm going to hit resign. And we'll have a look at the game and see actually how I did go. Did I do anything else really wrong other than King H2? And before I check with the computer, I will also look at what I could have done instead of King H2. Yeah, okay. Well, guess I'll try this. And we'll see what happens. So he takes with the bishop. I could try this move. Yeah, if I play this and he comes here, I guess I would have this, which is kind of interesting. Guess we have to try it. You can give a check, of course. So where do I go from here? Probably onto a dark square. Oh, this is not looking good, actually. Because regardless of where I'd gone, he would have a check. And I guess I could take onto another dark square there. Probably you would have to move his bishop. And like I said, yeah, the game is all over here. So let's just take it back quickly and have a look at the key move, I think, of the game. Which I think this was all okay up until this move here. So I failed to appreciate that this pawn is just not defended yet. I was speaking about playing this move, but I hadn't played it yet at all. And so really, I'd say the unexpected move started here. I didn't anticipate this move, bringing out his queen, which was a nice attack on the knight. And had I just jumped my knight up as planned, my fear was that, yeah, well, he could just capture this knight. And I wouldn't be able to recapture, of course, because his knight is here and he would be up a piece, which is why I decided to capture this knight first. Now, if he takes the knight, I can recapture the rook. However, even in that circumstance, he can take a pawn. And there is a question about the safety of this knight. But even if I lose this knight, it wouldn't necessarily be the end of the world at all. I'm not sure where he should put his queen. But for argument's sake, let's say he came there, I could put my rook out into this position, and I would actually like that position a lot. So I didn't think this was wrong. I wonder if maybe here what I should have done potentially was to take this, and when he recaptures, then to jump out here. This might have been interesting. Now if he comes here attacking this pawn, now I would still not have the ability really to play this because of checkmate being a strong threat. So perhaps, is there any other? I mean, I might have had to play this, but then you lose the pawn. So I think I was probably just too hasty to get my knight up here. He played this move, I believe, wasn't it? What else could I play? So I'm going to have a good think about this now. What else could I have done in this scenario? Because, of course, his threat is that he wants to take this pawn. And because my king is where it is, I wouldn't be able to take back since that pawn is pinned. That was the whole idea of why I played king h2. Now, if he takes the pawn, I can recapture either way. And life should be all good. Knowing about this threat now, probably it's best to take with the king. Or it probably doesn't matter. But knowing that that's not the only threat, there's also this threat. The question then becomes, how do you deal with both threats at once? And possibly it is, in fact, to just play f4, defending the pawn, and also attacking the queen, so that now this move would fail because he loses the queen. The issue with that is he can take here. And that's a real problem, because now even if I take the bishop, again, he's coming in with checkmate. He's coming in with checkmate. So perhaps if I do this and he captures this, I would have to take like this first. Then if he takes my rook, then I can come here and take. And in this scenario, again, I've lost a piece. So what would be the solution to this position? And if there is no solution, then does that mean that I was actually wrong here to develop my knight out as quickly as I did? And should I, in fact, instead of playing this, should I have started like this and just given him this pawn? I mean, it just seems wrong on the face of it, because now this pawn's under attack as well. It doesn't seem very good at all. Okay, let's again have one more look at this position. What else could I have done? Well, the one thing that comes to mind is the move that I was talking about during the game, and which came to my mind, during the game in this sort of position. I was talking about how his queen was preventing my queen from getting to d4. And the moment he made this move, the first thought that crossed my mind was, maybe my queen can come to d4 now. And perhaps had I done that, it would have been a good idea, because I defend this pawn, so that threat is taken care of. The only remaining threat was that he would take this pawn. If he takes this pawn, at least now I'm counterattacking the rook. The issue still remains that if I take the rook, he has checkmate here on g2. So I can't allow that, but what I could do now is to take the knight, and the bishop will defend this g2 square. So he would probably have to recapture, and then I can recapture with the queen, and I'm no longer attacking the rook, but at least my queen is defending the g2 square. And in this position, it appears that everything is being held together, possibly in a very tenuous fashion, but it seems like it's being held together. What I also like about this position is that my knight and my queen are somewhat working nicely. f4 is becoming possible. King h2 is becoming possible as well, as a threat against the bishop. And materially, I haven't actually lost a piece. So it would seem to me that perhaps here I should have played queen d4. So if I could revise my position, that's what I think I would do. Queen d4. And I will check that with the computer. I think that's really the only thing I wanted to check in this game. Of course, I'll run through the rest of the game and make sure that, especially the moves before this point, just make sure I didn't make any other great disaster blunders. But I think queen d4 here was possibly the right way to go. I wonder if had he played a move like this, threatening mate and also threatening check, this could have been difficult to deal with yet again. I suppose here I could have played this. And the position's very complex. Of course, there's a big issue now that I see. Check, forking the queen. Maybe now my queen can come to e4, providing a little bit of extra support. But now the bishop can come in here. And the situation seems dire, no matter how I try and slice the cake. Pushing the pawn, firstly, it gives up a rook. Secondly, it doesn't actually threaten. Well, it does actually threaten to take. That's true. This bishop's going to get away one way or other. And he's going to be up a piece again. So actually, perhaps not even queen d4 solves my issues. Which makes me think quite possibly this is where I went wrong. What else should I have done here? Maybe here was the time to bring my queen out. Defend the knight, defend the h3 square. Then any move like this could simply be met by capturing. And this is looking quite scary. It's looking extraordinarily scary. So yeah, it seems like I went wrong somewhere, and I really can't quite figure it out exactly where. I thought that I was doing fine here. Castled. Of course, I was already pretty low on time, and I played this move without much thought. Possibly here I should have played something different, you know? Like possibly here, I could have played this move straight away. Then even if he had played a move like this, I could take his bishop. Now after he recaptures, I could take the knight and possibly win a pawn. So maybe that was the better way to go. You know, and that would have been the kind of thing where concrete calculation might have actually been the difference. Okay, so let's have a little, let's have a look now at a computer-based analysis. A quick click through the game, have a look at those key moments, and that will round out the session. So the analyzation is happening. And it looks like there were a few errors. Indeed. If I can click back to the start of the game, that would be good. It's going to let me do that. Okay. So starting just with book moves here, this is Italian. This is the Gyokko piano game with castling on move 4. D3 and H3, both good moves. Bishop E3 is good. Knight D2, this is all going very nicely so far. So C3 actually is an inaccuracy. That's interesting to me. What did it want instead? It wanted bishop takes D4 instead. And then let's see if pawn takes. Is it going to say this? No, it's going to say A4 in that scenario. Or bishop, knight B3. Yeah, okay. Knight B3. I'm guessing we're gonna run home. No. Okay. Yes. Bishop B6 or castles, either way. Okay. I sort of had the idea that this pawn structure would actually be a little bit difficult for me to deal with. I suppose then I could have played C3 at some point. But in any case, had he taken with the bishop, would it have been a matter of capturing the bishop and then relocating the other knight? Indeed, takes, and then where does this knight go? Probably to one side or the other. Actually likes f4 and a4, bishop b3, f4. f4 was kind of in keeping with the way that I would have, kind of my style of play. So a4 is also possible as prophylaxis against b5. I didn't consider that in the game. Knight f3 as well, it's also giving. So, any of these moves would have been good. Then you can play knight f3 in the future if you wish. Had he played something like this, which is what I was afraid of, what's the computer's suggestion? Perhaps we're going to use this as an outpost square in future. So we can get rid of the knight first. And after knight h7, for instance, knight e4. Okay, but I would have thought this was a fork. So what am I missing after d5? Knight d6 check. Got a beautiful outpost square there. King has to move to f8. Bishop still looks, no, not trapped because it can take on d5. That's a pretty nice idea. That is a very nice idea. So had he played this move, he can attack. Had he taken here, we can take back. He's going to have to move at some point. Say he comes here, that's certainly not going to be good because of this pressure. Okay, so there's a lesson learned, I suppose, that in such conditions, as you often see, this knight will jump down in these kinds of positions. Taking would be the way to go rather than c3. Okay. Now it wants me to take on a6. Why is that so good? I just thought that helped him to develop, which is why I didn't do it. I guess I can take here and somewhat destroy his pawn structure. That's what the computer says. But then what? Knight takes e5. Yeah, there's a pawn on pre there. And f4 becomes available. Possibly followed by knight f3. So, yeah, that would have been good, actually. Now I think about it, of course, if he takes with the pawn, then again we can take, and we've won a pawn. So I missed that. I missed just simple tactics. Had I taken this, and he took this, then I suppose I could give a check, or I could take the bishop. Taking the bishop would probably be best. I'm assuming he will take with check. We take back with the rook almost certainly. He would take probably with his rook, I would imagine. Either way. And here we've won some material too. So I guess I didn't really consider it, tactically you should consider captures, and I didn't really consider it from a tactical perspective. I looked at it conceptually and said, if I take, it helps him to develop. And I stopped. I should have continued and said, well, then if I take again, there's a pawn free for taking. Okay. Nevertheless, the move I played was still a good one. And although I didn't take maximal advantage, it's not like I gave him the advantage. I still retained an advantage, just a smaller advantage. After he moved away here, I somewhat struggled to find a move, but I think bishop b3 was good. d5 would have been best, and I considered d5. I didn't like the way it blocked my bishop. Okay. Here e5 was good. d5 again was better. It's going to be hard for me to understand why that's the case exactly. Let's say he takes. What's the big deal? I'm not exactly sure. So anyway, I think this is good. We can move on. I would prefer to spend more time on the key moments. So when he moved here, Take on a7 is good. So all of this stuff is good. And so far in the game, I have developed an advantage. Okay, and this was good too, developing the knight. This is also good, so it wasn't a mistake. And this is so interesting to me that this move of queen h4, which has given me so much trouble to solve, was itself a mistake on his end. So what does it want played? It certainly doesn't want this played, although it says I still have the advantage. It says the best here is to take his knight, which keeps everything defended. And after he recaptures, then knight takes e6, which makes sense. Makes lots of sense. After he recaptures, then queen d4, queen d4 then at that point. Okay, that is interesting. Now, had I played this at that point, I'm assuming that becomes bad for me. It becomes more or less a draw. So queen d4 at that point, I was at least correct to see that queen d4 was a key idea. I didn't quite get to play it or exactly how to play it, but I recognized that it was an idea. So I could have, at that point, put in the queen d4 move. But as played, I took, and I still retain the advantage. And at that point, jumping the knight up was incorrect. And what I should have done was, in fact, queen d4. I didn't know how to solve this issue, though. How would he solve this issue? Queen e3. Right, that's not the issue that I wanted to solve. I played this, queen g5, and then the best solution, which I couldn't see a solution for, I didn't think that this was a solution because of knight f4. Okay, exactly, that's what I thought. It says the best solution is rook e1. Now he comes here threatening mate. I guess we're going to put a queen there. No, we're going to play g3, and we're going to allow him to take here with check. I mean, it doesn't look good, and certainly he has an advantage. It's very scary to play. I suppose I can move my king to the f1 square, and he's somewhat run out of steam at least. So yeah, extremely interesting, that defensive idea, which didn't come to my mind at all, of just playing rook e1 and preparing to give this pawn away and then play on. Rook e1 to defend this important pawn and to give the king a square to go to. So that was what I missed. That was what I missed. And my response to that, king h2, was a very big mistake. And all of a sudden, I had gone from having a nice advantage throughout most of the game to, well, throwing the advantage away. And basically, it's in a draw, difficult to play, but a draw, to in a single move being completely lost. From that point on, I think I at least struggled to survive decently. But there was nothing to do. And I'm not going to pay much attention to this at this point. What did it really want? I wanted queen f3, but it didn't matter at this point. So that's why I'm not going to pay much attention to it. Okay, so that was an interesting game. What I took from that game was that, you know, even without the opening theory of the Italian, I was able to navigate the Italian in a pretty sensible fashion and to obtain a nice position, a nice advantage position. think what I learned is this notion of a knight jumping down to d4. When you oppose their dark squared bishop in the Italian, if they take, of course, you're going to recapture. If they play back there, I mean, you could take, or you could continue on in your development, which is probably what I would have done personally. But in the situation that they jump their knight down, certainly consider taking. And if they take back with the bishop, you could recapture. And then after you develop, you can have a chance to play f4, maybe a4, depending on the situation. Now it's actually saying c3, but I probably would have developed here. So that was one idea. The other idea I took from this was just double checking, if I take, okay, he gets to develop, but just going one step further and checking, could I have won a pawn there and allowed for f4 to occur? Okay, finally, obviously time management needs to be better. But on the whole, pretty sensible play. Pretty sensible play. And even when I was inaccurate, I still retained the advantage. Except for here, where I should have taken. And after the bishop takes, I assume we can, okay, now it just wants continued development. Although to me, okay, so if he takes, then I can play my queen here. Is that the idea? With a double attack. That's a nice idea. That was a nice idea. Okay. But really the big mistake of the game was, as mentioned, king h2, just blundering. Blundering the pawn and the knight that went with it. So for all the subtleties, it's still a blunder in my game. Still a blunder is the deciding factor, most likely due to time pressure. So I'm going to play longer games and we'll see how that goes. So see you next time.